The big area there, to be honest with you, is around improving soil fertility. There's no rocket science in this stuff. It's about improving soil fertility. And that really means using more lime for most farmers. It constantly amazes me at the low uptake we have in lime use in the country. It's the greatest fertiliser you could ever use. If you use lime to correct the pH imbalance on your farm, you'll make more nitrogen available. You'll lift your soil P and K index. So you're getting free nitrogen, you're getting free phosphate and free potash by applying lime.
I'm joined this week by George Ramsbottom, head of the Teagasc Signpost Advisory Programme. George joins us to discuss how Irish dairy farmers can improve their carbon footprint. Thanks for joining us, George.
Thanks very much, James. Nice to be back on the dairy edge after a bit of a hiatus there. I've been away for 2 years, but you're doing a great job, in fairness to you.
I was going to say, familiar face. Maybe to start, George, why is it important, and why are we having this conversation?
Why it's important, there are a number of reasons for that. And number one, carbonisation is associated with climate change, and we can all see, very much more variable climate today than we used to have. And the second big reason is because it's embedded in our policy to reduce our carbon footprint nationally across all sectors. And agriculture, I should say, including dairy, has a target of a reduction of 25% by 2030, which is a hell of a target.
How do we rank in Irish dairy, and we'll say compared to our international peers?
Well, I had a quick look around the world to see what was going on there for that one, because I actually might ask me that question, James. So, kind of pasture-based, reasonably efficient systems, Ireland, New Zealand and Uruguay of all places, we're ranking very well at around 0.8 to 0.95 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilo of milk produced. Some of the more intensive indoor but high volume systems, countries like Italy, US, Germany, they're ranking around the 1 to 1.5 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilo of milk produced. And I was out in Kenya a few years ago. I think I might talk in this program about it. Countries like Kenya, India, where inputs are very high but productivity is relatively low, they're coming in with a footprint of between 2 and 3 kilos of carbon dioxide equivalent per kilo of milk produced. But I suppose in those countries, milk is an important food stuff for the people. So I suppose we can't be too critical of what's going on in places like that. So huge variation, Ireland among the leaders when it comes to footprint.
And can you maybe explain, that's on a per kilo of product basis, George, how are we going to be assessed? And you mentioned the 25% target. Is that on absolute total emissions? And just for our farmer listeners, because I think that often maybe causes a little bit of frustration, where we obviously rank extremely, extremely well. But also we have these targets to meet.
Yeah, so it's a kind of a total emission figure is what we're evaluated on. But if we can reduce if we can maintain footprint, but reduce increase the efficiency or reduce the footprint per kilo of product, we will be able to reduce our total emissions in that regard, James. So it's measured in total. We talk about footprint a lot, but it's actually the total emissions that were being counted against in agriculture with a target for reduction. And Ireland is kind of unique among our European counterparts in that, quite a high proportion of our total emissions actually come from agriculture. So in Ireland for 2024, the figure is around 38%. In the counterparts like Germany or Italy, and in the US, in fact, the total emissions coming from agriculture is about 9 to 10%. So there's quite a big difference between ourselves and a lot of our European counterparts because of the fact that Ireland really is a big farm still.
It poses a challenge, but probably also opportunities in terms of what we can do in that space as well, George.
There's massive opportunities there for farmers to improve their emissions profile and improve their efficiency at the same time. And 90% of the stuff we're going to talk about later, about the actions we can take, James, they're actually both positive from an environmental perspective and positive for your pocket as well.
Yeah, that's an important point. Maybe before we get to that, what progress has been made to date nationally? I see the national stats, and they've outlined a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. And how has this happened?
When we talk about a 25% reduction, it's off a base of the year 2018. And for the last 2 years, we saw slight increases in 2019, 20, and 21, but it's on the turn again. And in 23 and in 24, they fell. So they fell by something like 4.3% in 2023, and our emissions from agriculture fell by a further 1.7% in 2024. What was driving the reduction in emissions in 23 was principally around a big drop in fertilizer use. It's not ideal because, while we have a target to reduce fertilizer input, there is a certain kind of basal level of fertilizer required at the same time to maintain productivity. And in 2024, fertilizer was back up a bit again, but stock numbers in particular had fallen. And that seems to have the combination of the two seems to have balanced out in favour of a reduction in emissions for the second year in a row. So hopefully things will continue on a downward trajectory in terms of emissions, while at the same time on an upward trajectory in terms of efficiency and economics.
And I looked recently at the Signpost Demo Farm report, and I actually seen, George, where the greenhouse gas emissions increased slightly. Can you maybe just explain this? Because looking from the outside in, you're kind of looking demonstration farms and how would there possibly be an increase, but maybe just explain that.
So yeah, I was reading that report there. So emissions on the signpost farms actually increased by something like 2% over the period that was being measured. But there's a couple of things going on there. Footprint had fallen. Footprint wasn't quoted in the document. Footprint is the kilos of emissions per kilo of product. So what was driving up the total emissions increase on those farms was an increase in production. And if we look at the cohort of farmers who were engaged as signpost farmers with us, they're a really expansion oriented, hugely progressive group of farmers. So it's probably doesn't come as a huge surprise that things were on the up slightly on those farms. Maybe what's positive about it is they were able to expand while reducing the footprint on those farms. And there's a message in that for all other farmers as well.
You mentioned it there earlier, the actions. So, what actions are readily available there to farmers, and what can they implement that's going to have a positive impact on their farms?
Look, there's nothing new in the actions. It's something I thought when I moved over to work a bit more closely with the Signpost Advisory Programme that it was going to be revolutionary, but it's actually back to the knitting. So the core issues are based on the 12 steps for dairy that Teagasc produced a couple of years ago. And the big area there, to be honest with you, is around improving soil fertility. It's no rocket science in this stuff. It's about improving soil fertility. And that really means using more lime for most farmers. It constantly amazes me at the low uptake we have in lime use in the country. It's the greatest fertilizer you could ever use. If you use lime to correct a pH imbalance on your farm, you will make more nitrogen available. You lift your soil P and K index. So you're getting free nitrogen, you're getting free phosphate and free potash by applying lime. That's the first thing. Get the soil index right. The second thing then is to spread your slurries in an environmentally friendly way, and that's by using the less equipment that's there, low emission slurry spreading equipment at the right time of the year. And the third big one then around the whole fertilizer and soil fertility is around the use of protected urea. It's worked fabulously well this year. Everything is working fabulously well this year, but protected urea is working extremely well. And the growth that we've seen across the summer has been absolutely fabulous. It was blamed on protected urea last year not working. That's not the fact. Last year, no matter what you applied, nothing grew. This year is a completely different year. Protected urea is on a bounce and it's going really, really well. And that's the third aspect around soil fertility and fertilizer.
That's an important point, George, and the fact that you mentioned it earlier. This maybe cutting out fertilizer and as a result then actually having a reduction in grass grown on farm. That's not what we're looking for either. So what you're saying there is you do apply your fertilizer, but it comes in the form of protected urea.
Correct. And opportunities for reducing chemical nitrogen will follow getting your soil fertility right. But they're also linked in then as well to incorporating clover into your farm. So clover look at everyone says clover didn't work last year. Nothing worked last year. This year it's a real boom year for clover. It's going really, really well. And when it's growing well and there's a high content in the fields, there's an opportunity to reduce chemical nitrogen in those situations. And obviously it comes along with better grassland management, because with better grassland management will come more productivity from your cows out of grass and greater yields of milk solids per cow. But also that leads onto the whole thing of rearing your heifers better and getting our age of calving. I think around 70% of our heifers are now calving at 2 years of age. That's actually a sea change from a couple of years ago when I was on the dairy game, when it was about 45 to 50%. So we've really come a long way in improving the proportion, increasing the proportion of our heifers calving at the right time. Let's push that towards the 100% over the next few years. And I suppose the other things that come in then, there's a couple other ones then around animal health and breeding the right type of beef calves for the beef farmer. And that's involved, that focuses in on using, improving the DBI of the bulls chosen and the CBV of the calves that you're sending off the farms. And that's going a long way. I can see that having a major influence on what's happening over the next couple of years, James.
Yeah. So that's what's readily available at the moment, George. And as you say, I think everybody wants something new, but really it's doing the basics really, really well and implementing the technologies that are there and readily available, isn't it?
People want something that's novel, but have they what's already established fully implemented on their farms? And to be honest, on most farms, there's still substantial scope for improvement on the basics before they even talk about some of the newer technologies. And the two big new ones that will come down the line in a few years to get us the rest of the way will be around slurry additives. I've seen nothing yet that impresses me, to be honest about it, in terms of slurry. There's a bit of work to be done there yet. And secondly, around feed additives. And there's good scope for feed additives to have a role, but we'll have to get consumer buy into that one before we even consider those two options at the moment. And again, those options are the only two that are going to cost farmers money without delivering a huge payback. So we have to think about the method of payment for those as well.
That's, I suppose, where the challenge comes around the policy piece around that, George.
Correct.
All the
Correct.
other ones have a positive impact on the bottom line at farm level, but those ones are, as you say, are going to cost farmers.
So we'll have to figure out how they can be paid for. Exactly.
Absolutely. Tell me about you're heading up this Signpost Advisory Programme. Tell me a bit about that.
Okay, so I'm heading up the Signpost Advisory Programme, James, and that's it's a program that engages 20. We got a bit of funding from the department to employ 21 staff, and those staff are charged with recruiting farmers into the advisory program. When you join the advisory program, all dairy farms, we'd love to have all dairy farmers in the country involved, because they're probably the biggest. It's the biggest emitting enterprise of all in Ireland, even though they're not necessarily the biggest number of farmers. But when they join, we'll do three things. Number one, we'll establish your footprint. Number two, we'll help you to make a sustainability plan then, to take some of the actions that we talked about earlier on. And there'll be a reminder of what you need to be doing over the next couple of years. And number three, there'll be ongoing support in the form of your own local dairy advisor and in the form of invitation to events that will have an environmental focus attached to them. So that's why we're looking for people to get involved. And when they join, using the AgNav program, which is a collaborative effort between ourselves, Board BIA and ICBF, when people join, they get to see what their footprint is. And it's amazing that knowing your footprint is the first step in reducing your footprint. And it is having an impact at farm level.
That's an important point. We talk a lot about at industry level in terms of reducing the footprint, but at individual farm level, George, if you can't, if you haven't measured it and know where you're at, I suppose it's very hard to gauge where you can make improvements and what improvements have been made.
Exactly. So that's where you start, is to know what like at this stage, the farmers we're dealing with, James, they'll know their EBI and they'll know the milk and fertility sub-indexes, and a lot of them know some of the factors that underpin that. But we need farmers, we need our cohort, our group here that we work with, to know what their footprint is as well, and have that at the top of their heads as well. And that'll come. That's going to come.
And you mentioned there's 21 advisors around the country. How do our farmer listeners engage with this group? How do they get involved?
Very easy. Contact your local Teagasc office. All of our offices are aware of who the climate advisor in the region is, and they'll put them in contact with that person. You don't need to be a Teagasc advisor, a Teagasc client to do that. It's free to everyone, and our advisors are always looking to recruit more people into the program.
So, as you say, it's open to everybody. It's a nationwide service to all Irish
It's
farmers, not only dairy farmers, but we're obviously talking in the context of dairy farmers today.
they're recruited from Donegal to Wexford, across into Kerry and up to County Louth. So they're all over the place. Farmers and advisors are all over the country.
You mentioned it there, the AgNav tool,
Mm.
and we only touched on it. Maybe get into a little bit more detail. It's an advisory tool being used by your signpost
Yeah,
advisors.
it
What
says. Yeah.
exactly does it do?
So basically, it's we're probably world leaders in the use of AgNav. It's a collaborative effort between ourselves, ICBF, and Board BIA. Board BIA provide their quality assurance data, the data that goes into their origin green scheme there to make farmers quality assured. So all dairy farmers, for example, are quality assured. So every 18 months they fill up a survey that talks about the length of the grazing season, the feed input on their farms, stuff around the size of the size of the farm, the number of units of fertilizer being applied, all that kind of data is fed into it. That's fed into a database, and it's combined with data from ICBF around stock numbers and milk production and beef production on the farm. And we've done huge work in the background. Teagasc, I mean, has done huge work in the background around establishing the emissions factors for various fertilizers and different types of systems of beef and milk production. So all that data is fed in together. And from it, then we can see what the footprint per kilo of beef live weight or what the footprint per kilo of milk is being produced through the AgNav program. So it's a fabulous bit of kit that we have there developed, and every farmer needs to be using that kit just to push the thing on. Now, the second part of it then is the forecaster. And the forecaster is looking at some of the actions that farmers can take off the 12 steps program that we have for reducing emissions. And it can see the impact of implementation of those steps. So, for example, if you're using 30% protected urea, what would increasing that to 90% do for your farm and in terms of gaseous emissions? Or how would extending the grazing season what would that do for your farm? Or what would reducing the quantity of fertilizer that you use on your farm do for your gaseous emissions as well? So all of those sort of factors, some of the actions are listed and can be checked through the forecaster to see their impact. And the third
That's
part of it then is the creation. Sorry, James, I'm cutting across you here. The third part of it is the creation of the sustainability plan that allows farmers then to go home with a written document outlining what they can and can't do or should and shouldn't do over the next number of years to reduce that footprint.
Yeah, that forecaster element is just. I was going to say that it's a nice piece, George, in the fact that it can predict. It kind of shows a pathway through the AgNav platform, but it can predict in terms of where your carbon footprint will actually be at when you
Yeah,
implement certain measures, which is
and I know of no other country that has anything like it available to their farming population. So it's a huge opportunity for Ireland to lead the way and hopefully be rewarded for it in the years ahead.
that obviously the AgNav platform and program is central to the Signpost Advisory Program. So we would encourage our listeners to engage in that if you haven't already. But maybe to
Right.
finish up, George, what one or two changes or what one or two technologies would you say there at the moment it'd make the biggest difference on your typical Irish farm?
Okay, so there's no real magic bullet here, James, but the ones that have been the ones that I'd encourage people to do most and start with anyway, will be around improving the soil and getting the soil fertility right. Get that right. Because when you get the soil fertility right, it starts to yield up more phosphate and potash and nitrogen as well. And that's about getting your pH, correcting the pH imbalances first, and then working on your P and K levels. That's number one. Number two, when you are using nitrogen, use as much of it in the form of protected urea as you can. It's working really, really well. Okay, that's number two. And number three, the target there, 90% used. With the other blends, then blends like 18612 have been proven to be the best blends to use when you need to improve your P and K supplementation to your soil. So use 18612, 0730, 18612, and protected urea as your principal forms of fertilizer. And I suppose then moving long term, we're talking more about incorporating as much clover as you can into your swards and reducing the quantity of nitrogen that you're applying. And don't reduce the nitrogen unless you're sure you can grow the grass that you're going to need to feed your stock without it. Because if you have stock on the farm, if it's worth keeping them on the farm, it's worth feeding them. And don't reduce your fertilizer unless you're confident that you can feed them with less nitrogen being applied. Because if you can't, it's only going to cost you money.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that soil fertility one is cash flow is obviously good on farms. That's one that can be corrected relatively easily from a pH point of view anyway. So something people should be looking at. So I think there's lots of simple messages there, George, as you said throughout this. It's very much about doing the basics really, really well. You've outlined some of those, embrace the technologies that's there. And also the clover is a longer term one. That's not going to happen overnight. But if you're not already engaged in that, I would say get involved and get yourself on the pathway to including clover on your farm. So that's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. My thanks to George Ramsbottom for joining me on this week's show. If you have any questions, folks, on this week's episode or have suggested topics you'd like discussed, you can send them to us at the following email address, dairyedge.podcast@teagasc.ie. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm James Dunne, and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.